Hello, and welcome to another installment of bookbinding techniques used in medieval Islamic bookbinding. Today I'm going to be sewing the primary endband on this book. Step one is to mark the center of each gathering. I've already done that for most of it, but I'll show you. So in this particular book I used 5 pages per gathering, so I will count 5 pages in, and then double check. You should see it's kind of hard to see in the shadows, but there's a dark blue thread hiding in there, so you know that it's the center of the gathering. Put a little piece of scrap paper there to mark where it is, and then find the center of the next gathering. So there's 5 pages, 3, 4, 5 to the end of the gathering, and then another 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the center of the next gathering. And apparently I miscounted, because as you can see there is no thread in the middle there. So you can either go back and recount, or you can check, there we go, pages to either side to see which one's the right one. And then put a marker there. And then we'll double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. End of the gathering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Center of the next one, and I've already marked it. If you do 4 pages per gathering, which is a bit more common, you'll count 4 pages and then 8 pages in between gatherings. So once you've got them all marked, we're going to just put this magnifying glass here so you can see a little better what I'm doing. Alright, you'll need thread on a needle. I generally use the same color thread that I use to bind the book, but that's not strictly required. The other thing you're going to need is the Endband core. Leather is the most common. Tightly rolled paper or parchment is also an option. I use whatever scrap leather I have lying around. So in this case it's chrome tan leather, which is not the best, but it works okay. About 1/8 of an inch wide is usually fine, and then you want it longer than the width of the spine by enough to be able to kind of grab hold of it if needed, but not so long that it's, sticking out to here and is unwieldy. So first thing we're going to do is anchor the thread. So to do that, you're going to start on the outside, and you're going to go through the spine lining, and only the spine lining, to the inside. And then you're going to go up a short distance, and you're going to go back to the outside again, only through the spine lining. And I try and do it as close to this join as I can, so that when you finish binding the book, it's not really noticeable. Okay. So for this first stitch, I actually leave the endband core kind of off to the side. I'll pick it up in a minute. So what you're going to do is you're going to go from the inside of the book to the outside of the book for each of these stitches, and you're going to try and do it at about the same distance down on the spine. I shoot for approximately somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. You don't want it like super close to the top, and you don't want it super far down. You also want to try and get it roughly the same distance across. In each one, it doesn't matter if like one's here and one's here and one's here and one's here, but it looks better if they're all nice and even across. So I start by anchoring one in the outside before the first gathering. So you're going from the inside through the outside, just as you were doing before, but this time your thread started on the outside, so you form a loop. And as you pull that loop tight, you're going to grab your endband core and put it in the middle. I try and do it so that it's a flat side up. You could do it with the short side up, but I don't know that that works very well. I haven't tried it. And then you pull it taut but not tight, so you want it resting gently on the endband core. You don't want it digging into the endband core. If you're indenting the core as you work, you're not doing it right, and you're going to have trouble in the secondary endband, because you have to be able to get your needle in between the thread and the endband core. And then go through the loop like this, that's going to link it to the next stitch in order and provide a little extra structure. So then you find the first center gathering using your piece of paper marker. I take the marker out, hold in place, and you are going to stab the needle through the center of the gathering about the same distance as you did before, so roughly that. And you're going to stab all the way through the paper and the spine lining to the outside. Let's see. Yep, I did a pretty good job. I got it right next to the other one. You're going to make sure that this loop goes over the end band core, not down under here, over the core. And you're going to go through the loop like you did before. You're going to make sure it ends up sitting next to the stitch you just made. Like that. And then you go to the next one. And technically you don't have to mark the centers before you go. You can count as you go, but I find it very helpful to mark them first, because then you can count the markers and make sure you have the same number of markers as you do gatherings. That way you know you didn't miss one. It's harder to do that if you're just doing it. You're finding the centers as you go. And you may find that stitches will slip as you work. You want them next to each other, but not so close that you can't tell how many stitches there are there. So I want a little bit of a gap in between the stitches. And you do this in the center of every gathering. And you can do it in two separate motions where you form the loop and then go through the center of the loop, but what I like to do is just poke it through and then take the loop, put it over my needle like that. That way when I pull the needle out, I have both made the stitch and gone through the stitch to link it. So when I'm talking about linking, that's this straight across line here that you can kind of you can see starting to form. You want to make sure as you work that your end band stays where it's supposed to be and doesn't slide down over the edge of the spine, which it'll do sometimes if the spine lining is a little bit loose. See, they're all nice and linked together. This straight line running across. Well, straight-ish line. What it looks like from my angle. Making the loop, putting it over the needle, and pulling it tight, or taut, rather. Again, you don't want it super tight, you don't want it digging into your end band core. You want it just kind of resting gently on the top of it. As you can see, I don't necessarily have a very straight line of stitches. They kind of go up and down. That's fine. It looks a little nicer if you manage to get them all the way straight across, but in the end of the day, you're going to cover this completely with the cover so no one's going to see it unless there's damage to the book. Oops. Sorry. and you can use the back end of your needle or your fingernails to move stitches around as you work. The goal is to have them kind of equidistant apart from each other, but that doesn't always end up happening because sometimes they move as you form the loop, like these two did. Once you finish sewing, you can kind of move things around a little bit if needed. Okay, and that was my last gathering. So just like at the beginning, I'm going to do one extra stitch into the outside of the gathering. This helps in the secondary endband stage to prevent the secondary endband from kind of pulling in and not covering the entirety of the width of the spine. It just works nice as a little anchor. Alright, so once I've done there, I got my stitch the outside of the gathering. I'm just going to tie off tightly. I just grab a small amount of the spine lining, only the spine lining, not the pages of the book. Form a loop, go back through the loop, pull it tight, do it again for security. Grab a little bit around the knot, form a loop, tighten the loop, and then I've always been taught to hide my threads, so I will take it to the inside before cutting it. Really, it doesn't make that much of a difference, because like I said, you're going to glue over the outside anyway. So that's the primary endband, and like I said, at this point you can kind of scoot the stitches around a little bit with your thumb or the back side of your needle to get them a little more evenly spaced to make it easier for the next step, which is sewing the secondary endband, and that's covered in another video.